Hope this doesn't break COVID protocol.
Very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this panel discussion here today, organized by the Finnish Institute of International Affairs and the Eurooppa-foorumi here in Turku. We will focus in this session on the three very interesting EU member states who happened to join the Union 25 years ago. My name is Juha Jokela. I work in the Finnish Institute of International Affairs, and I'm going to moderate this debate here today. And I'm very proud and honored to be doing this here in my beautiful hometown. I think the unfolding events of this year, obviously the COVID-19 crisis, has perhaps somewhat overshadowed the celebrations and discussions related to this particularly important year for these three countries. And I'm kind of happy to announce as well that we at FIIA are very happy that this is our first event here in Turku, and it focuses on this topic. And we will follow this topic. We will publish a policy paper on the Finnish foreign policy and how it has potentially changed during the membership years. And we will organize also a seminar with that respect, also hopefully including Austria and Sweden in our discussions. So there is still several months ahead of us. We can discuss this topic. And the purpose of this panel, when we were planning it, is kind of twofold. We thought that it's good to look back. 25 years is a long time. And we want to look at the past, how things have evolved, what were the key objectives of the membership of these three countries, and how potentially Europe has also changed in many fundamental ways during these 25 years. And secondly, we want to focus also on the future and the present day. And here we want to discuss what the next 25 years should actually include in policy terms or general approach, also the European Union. And to do all this in 45 minutes, I am delighted that I have some help here on the podium and also with a video link from Stockholm. So I will now introduce our panelists to you. So first we have here Mr. Maximilian Hennig, who is the Austrian ambassador to Finland, and he's been already talking today in the opening ceremonies of this forum, and I'm very happy to have you here on board with us. Thank you. Then we have Ms. Saila Heinikoski, who is a senior fellow in the Finnish Institute of International Affairs in our EU research program, and it's great to have you here with us as well. I guess this is more or less your hometown, currently at least.
Yeah.
And then we have Göran von Sydow, the director of SIEPS in Stockholm. I hope that the video link is working. At least I can see you there. It's great to have you on board as well. We were engaged in a similar discussion some months ago, before the COVID-19 actually, in Athens, and very much looking forward what you have to say today here with this audience. So to kick off the discussion, let's start from the past. And I have a very general question for the Austrian ambassador, because I think this is a topic that you wanted to address as well. And it relates to the EU and Europe. So how, from Austrian perspective, EU and Europe has changed during the past 25 years? What are the most important developments?
Thank you, Juha, and let me thank FIIA for organizing this panel today. I think the Europe that we joined in '95, the European Union we joined in '95, was definitely quite a different animal from the one we see before us today. At that time, there were 12 EU member states. It was Western Europe. And the three of us, Sweden, Finland and Austria, we were on the, if you want, on the eastern fringe, the periphery of the West, the ones who still got lucky when the Iron Curtain fell. For us, the geography was the most important argument in deciding about EU enlargement. And you cannot only take our accession in '95 in this process, but of course the enlargement rounds that followed, which mean that we moved from this peripheral role into the center of a much larger united Europe, surrounded by our neighboring countries. And then to take your question further a little bit, if I may, and already look to the future, because it's all about geography. As I said this morning, Europe isn't complete without the Balkans. I think with all the discussions we have today, we tend to forget that we have an obligation to the countries in the Western Balkans, that once they meet the membership criteria, we take them on board in the club. And I think it's very, very important to keep stressing this principle and this promise, because that's what we need to safeguard our stability for the future.
Maybe one more question to you related to the objectives of the Austrian membership. If there were any, or could you crystallize it in a way, one or two key objectives which kind of...
Of course, one of the main issues at that moment, as so often when we talk about the European Union, it's about the economy. For us at that time, and today still, Germany was our largest export partner. But the whole of Europe has become a very, very important trading partner. We do almost 70% of our trade with EU partners. So it's very much about the economy, but it's also something that has become very natural to all of us traveling throughout the European Union. For people living in a small country, it's very important to be able to visit your neighbors in Central and Eastern Europe, in Germany, in Italy. So the benefits that our population has, of course, are very important. Perhaps in '94, '95, when the decision was being taken, many of these issues were not even as present, and probably most of the arguments circled around the economy at the time.
The economy. And then if we move to Finland, I think there was at least one discussion in this country which was very important, that was security.
Yes.
But there is also this argument often made that Finland has been one of the most pro-integrationists of the Nordic states in the European Union. It is the only member state which belongs to the Euro area. It has been very constructive in its approach to the furthering integration. And I was wondering if Saila, to hear your view on why perhaps Finland has been most pro-integrationist of the Nordic states.
Yeah, I think there might be several reasons for this, but I think for Finland, when joining the EU, one of the key issues was also like identity and being like confirming Finland's position in the West and belonging to Western Europe, and perhaps this is also impacted the fact that Finland has wanted the European integration to move forward and being a pragmatic member and following the debates. And I think although the official line of Finland is to always consider case specifically if they want to join these differentiated arrangements, but I think there has also been this like all European benefit that has been important for Finland. So, for example, in the European Public Prosecutor's Office that will start its operation quite soon, I think it was justified also with that we're protecting European taxpayers' money, not just like Finnish interests as such, but also the whole European interest.
What about security? Because that's at least what President Koivisto has said, that it was perhaps the reason, after all, economy was very important as well. But how do you see whether the security is a similar topic, or in what ways potentially has it changed during these 25 years?
Yes. I think it has changed. Finland was quite a different country in the early 1990s, just after the Cold War and this neutrality policy that it was following. And I think, well, together with Sweden and Austria, Finland was first a bit reluctant to this mutual assistance clause, for example, in the constitutional treaty negotiation. But in recent years, Finland has become one of the most active member states to promote this defense cooperation. For example, this permanent structure cooperation, where Finland even boasted with having introduced this reference to the article on mutual assistance clause in the establishing document of PESCO. So I think it has become one of the key issues for Finland during the entire membership.
Thank you very much. And now to Stockholm, our dear neighbors. We are very sorry that you cannot be here with us today, but happy to see you online. When we look back usually the kind of a membership debate here in Finland, we often talk about a Swedish surprise, and that being that Sweden, somewhat suddenly from the Finnish perspective, decided to file in an application for full membership. There was, of course, the European Economic Area negotiations concluded, and then after Swedish application, Finland followed the suit. But I was wondering, was this a surprise for Swedes, and whether if it was, so in what respects perhaps it was in early 90s a surprise that Sweden will apply a full membership in the European Union?
Well, thanks a lot, Juha. I hope you can hear me in Åbo. I'm so sorry not to be able to join you physically. It seems that we Swedes are less popular these days than normally in our dear neighbors. But I'm happy to be here online with you anyhow. Now, your question, I mean, it sort of was a long process for many countries. And if you go back even further in history, Swedish relations to the European integration project was always done with a little view on what the UK were thinking. So in the early 1960s, when the first UK application, there was a discussion in Sweden, although at the time, as well as in the early 1970s, it was deemed incompatible with our policy of non-alignment and neutrality. When you fast forward to early 1990s, I think, as you've mentioned before, for the non-aligned countries, the end of the Cold War, it was really a necessary condition to join, to start talking about joining the EU. However, I think there are two other items that were important in the Swedish discussion. The first was the poor prospects of the EEA negotiations, that it was understood as a relationship that would have all the obligations included, but no right to vote, no seat around the table. So, I mean, similar to what Norway eventually ended up with. And it was then understood as a calculus of sovereignty that, in a sense, joining the EU, it means that you lose a lot of independence, and sovereignty and independence are very dear to a proud nation state such as Sweden. However, you can trade that with influence over the common rules. So that was an important sort of change in thinking among our leaders. But it's also true that there was a very sort of present discussion, and actually it can still surface occasionally in Sweden, about Swedish membership application being sort of done in a non-transparent way. Because that's the other item, the other condition that was very important in the early 1990s, that Sweden suffered a very hard economic downturn. And actually, the first time the government mentioned officially membership application, it was as a bit of a footnote in an economic recovery package. So, and that has come back occasionally, that the then, at the time, social democratic government, which was also deeply divided internally, it was done through this, as a mean of an economic recovery package that joining the European Union would play part in this. And I would say this has also stayed a little bit in our understanding of what the EU is. Precisely this notion that the market and the economic advantages of joining the European Union was important, and somewhat the perception of what the EU is or should be, is still very much that of a common market. So quite similar to traditional British EU policy. However, it has dawned to many Swedes that the European Union is quite a lot more than just a market. But I think there's still elements of this discussion in Swedish policy debates about European Union that comes back to this very way in which we applied for membership and the way it was framed at the time in the early 1990s.
And it was also an economic question, first of all, not too much about security.
No, but security was contentious at the time. I mean, among Eurosceptics, this was a very sort of important argument around the membership referendum in '94, etc. But I would also say that this argument has faded away quite substantially as the years have moved on. It's not that Sweden is very much in favor of, let's say, hard security issues in the European Union. We're still, similar to Finland, I guess, balancing a little bit here on our security commitments. But when you look at, let's say, more softer security issues or common foreign security policy, both in terms of policy at the political level, but also in terms of public opinion, etc., things have moved rather substantially in Sweden to a much more pro-European stance.
Interesting. So if we now try to look the present time and also the future, I think this is a very particular moment in time, actually, because we have had a very lively debate during this summer about the recovery fund, recovery tools, and essentially I think these debates reflects the questions related to sovereignty, also the questions related to the solidarity and the political cohesion in Europe. And I think this is a background for the second round of questions. I think we cannot avoid addressing these questions. So in light of the recovery package and the kind of heated debate about the direction of the Union in terms of common rules, solidarity, as well as political cohesion, given that we have 27 member states. So Saila, what would be your analysis about this debate here in Finland during this summer, and also about the Finnish EU aspirations? What kind of EU Finland would like to strive for in the coming years?
Yeah, I think the debate changed a bit just right after the summit. So I think first it was this debate about the net payments and how much is that and how much money Finland will get. But then we got this information about the negotiations, how it went, and it seemed that Finland had quite a big role eventually in finding the conclusion. And I think the approach was quite pragmatic in the sense that the attempt was to actually reach a conclusion, a bit of an intermediary even between these different groups. And I think that also reflects the entire Finnish EU approach, that it is important to be able to make decisions and have a functioning European Union where you can actually do these decisions that benefit European people. So I think that was quite important in the.
What is your view in terms of the kind of the potential of developing EU further? In a way, this summer, I think, has launched, at least in this country, the discussion about whether the main rules, meaning the treaties, should be amended in due course. Also that these reinterpretations of the treaty articles might not be sustainable in terms of the EU's legitimacy. So yeah, how would you think that the debate in Finland would develop if the treaties, for instance, would be opened, let's say, in 5 years' time?
Yeah, that would be very interesting. I think the current government is not that interested in opening the treaties and reforming them. But of course, if we can find that some issues may not be in conformity with the current treaties, or we want to do some decisions that are not in accordance, then of course it is necessary to reform them. But I think Finland probably has this kind of also this pragmatic approach in reforming, that Europe shouldn't perhaps go too far also in these issues, because we can see all these kind of critical approaches too, that it's important to keep this kind of a middle line in the policy.
And Ambassador Hennig, from an Austrian perspective, what kind of EU would you like to see in 25 years' time?
Oh, I wish I knew what the world would look like in 25 years' time. I think what the European Union should be is ready to face the challenges that are ahead for the next 25 years. So to pick up on the question you just asked Saila, to see whether we need a discussion on how the European Union works, our answer would be definitely yes. It's a painful discussion, and it will be very controversial. But frankly, I think we are facing so many difficult challenges today that we have to ask ourselves, are the instruments that we have at our disposal the right ones? And are we doing all we can to make these instruments as sharp as possible? I think the Commission has started off with a program to be a geopolitical one. The geopolitical questions we face today definitely are climate change, which is, if you want, a longer-term issue, but also very much a short-term issue. And we have the current pandemic crisis, which nobody was reckoning with, but which will definitely turn into an economic one. And we must ask ourselves, are the instruments that the European Union has in its toolbox, are they the right ones? And are we doing all we can to sharpen these tools? And so I think there's definitely merit for an in-depth discussion on that, even though it may be painful.
You mentioned it may be painful, and I think this is maybe one of the reasons why, after the constitutional treaty collapsed, so to say, there hasn't been an appetite to the treaty reforms. How would you think that, what are the possibilities in moving on, given the political landscape of Europe, also the very skeptical views related to the European integration, to move forward with that debate?
If I had a roadmap I could unroll here, I think I would be in a different position than where I am now. But I think the first step, of course, is to start a debate. And a convention is probably the most logical way of starting this. A lot can be done by tapping intellectual debate, also like places like here, where you get input from academia and politics and practitioners. And obviously also on bilateral level we can discuss this, but at the end it all has to come together somewhere. And I don't see why we shouldn't give it a shot. If it fails, it fails, but we have to say we tried. It's not like the problems are easy to solve. So.
Excellent. And then again to Sweden, Göran, I would say that the Brexit perhaps has been a major issue for all of the northern EU member states. We have lost a powerful ally in the EU negotiation tables and the decision making. I think Sweden, you already mentioned the UK, is a particularly interesting case here, because all of these three countries, Sweden is the only country which is not in the Eurozone, for instance. And I think there is quite a lively debate actually going on in the Swedish circles, how to adapt to this change. So what is your analysis and views on the question of how Brexit will change the political dynamics of the Union, and how Sweden is kind of adapting to this situation? We saw the Frugal Four in the MFF Recovery Fund negotiations, or Frugal 4.5, maybe Finland was the 0.5 in it. But how this debate is going on in Stockholm, how to have a say in the EU, and what kind of EU Sweden would like to see?
Thanks for that extremely difficult question, Juha. I think in terms of that comparison, I think Sweden has been looking and found sort of allies in the Frugal Four, and that also reminds perhaps a little bit of the role that the UK has played. However, whereas Finland, always more pragmatic, will find its own way of perhaps not looking for rebates, but looking for what's the delivery of the MFF negotiations. So that also perhaps highlights a little bit the difference in, if not political will, but also perhaps then style, the way in which we engage. And I think in the Swedish, at least my understanding sometimes of Swedish EU policy making has been looking at the UK very often in the absence of a sharply formulated own opinion. So the UK was always a big, loud, and sort of visible member that Sweden could pick up cues from. Not always aligning, but pretty often, you know. And that was also, in a sense, you know, easier way. Now, without the UK, Swedish policymakers need to think very much on their own, you know, ex ante. What do we believe? What do we want from this? And here I would also relate to the sort of political context in Sweden, which is a bit different from both Austria and in Finland, is the fact that we tend to have minority governments. We have a relatively strong parliament, active in European affairs, and minority governments. That is a constraining factor because it makes it harder for the government to, you know, be very upfront in the negotiations in early stages, etc. It does not always specify, we do not always specify with what we want, partly due to this sort of constraining factor. And here I think it's something of a paradox if you look over time. Now, if you look at Swedish public opinion in relation to the European Union, it has grown more positive over the years. In the early years of membership, there was, you know, very low levels of support, something like 30%, 40% at times. Now we're at 60% in favor of EU membership. However, behind that, sort of, you're in principle very much in favor, even more in favor than many other member states. But if you look at, you know, more questions relating to the future, how about joining the Eurozone? I think now in our latest poll we issue at our institute, we're about 15% that would like to join the Eurozone. How about going forward towards more of a United States of Europe or deepening, very, very 10% support levels. So the general public opinion has grown more positive, but when it comes to the future, it's always more status quo. Not to change too much. Let's keep, you know, internal market functioning. We want free trade, and we want sort of efficient cooperation on a number of items such as environment, etc. Now, the paradox, I think, in a sense, is that the political parties or actors that deal with European affairs, it seems almost that they've grown more skeptical over the years, while public opinion has grown more and more positive. So I think there is something here of a limbo state. I think Brexit really provoked this shock. Where are we now? We lost this major player that we tend to agree with. The Eurozone are talking about the deepening of cooperation. The Franco-Germans are getting along very well in terms of talking about deepening and also in terms of in political substance. Issues such as, you know, protecting Europe, being perhaps more protectionist, developing a new industrial strategy, giving more tools to supranational governance, etc. These are all items that are a bit sensitive in the Swedish context. And currently we don't really have as I would say, if I'm critical, not a very future-oriented discussion about European integration or any other themes actually in this respect here.
I think this is maybe a common problem, at least some of our colleagues have highlighted, as it seems to be the case here in Finland as well often, that when there is a need for EU debate, it seems to be somehow late from the debate. Things have moved on already, and there seems to be very little appetite to actually start a debate well in advance when it really could have an impact and implications for the decisions. But that's, of course, maybe a political problem and a bigger political systems like EU, a major problem. Thank you very much, Göran. And now it would be time for some questions, comments from the audience. So if you want to pose a question, please feel free to do so. There are 2 mics in this room, and any question related to the 25 years of membership as well as 25 years of the membership to come would be welcome. Please.
Thank you. Working. Aapo Pukarinen, Eurooppa-foorumi Turku. I worked in a university project in my home university, University of Turku, and the subject for research was EU's capacity as a long-term decision maker in comparison, of course, to the national unit. How do you see it? I can continue my research after the question then, after receiving the answers. Is EU like more apt to make long-term decisions than the national unit? Is the countries, national countries, more like tied to short-term fluctuations in politics rather than EU? It's an abstract one, I'm sorry.
I think it's a very interesting question, actually, because we often don't think about the EU's kind of possibilities for long-term planning. I think it's often assumed that they are not extensively good because of given the political realities and the 27 sovereign states around the tables. But do you have any views on that interesting question, Ambassador?
I'll give you an abstract word to answer, which is the famous subsidiarity, which means very different things to very different people. For us in Austria, living in a federal system, it means trying to make the decisions as close as possible to the people. And I think President Juncker was the one who said, you know, have the big entities, Europe, deal with the big questions, and the smaller entities deal with the smaller questions. I think there's quite some merit to that. Definitely there are policy areas where it's useful to work within the framework of the European Union, and these are the big global questions ahead of us, including fighting climate change. A small country like Austria or like Finland cannot combat climate change on its own. This is a collective effort. It makes sense to shoulder the burden collectively and work on this collectively. Another success story, if you want, is the common agricultural policy, which, although we have very, very diverse agricultural systems in Europe, we have managed to manage this system collectively, and I think with all the pitfalls in the system, it has served the farmers not quite well. But there are also areas where it's perhaps easier to leave it to the member states or even to the smaller substructures underneath regional authorities and local authorities. So, yeah, abstract question, abstract answer, sorry.
Yes, yeah, that's a very good question, very interesting research topic. I think climate change and fighting climate change is a very good example where we can see that the European Union has actually had these objectives in 2030, 2050 in a very, very long perspective, and it may be that in these big issues the European Union might be even better in this. But then if we think about the major changes that have taken place in the European Union that have usually been the result of a crisis and been more of this reactionary, for example, now this recovery package and financial crisis, migration crisis. So it's there are both elements involved, but that would be very interesting to see what you find. How is this compared to the national politics?
Now I don't know if we have lost Göran von Sydow.
No, I'm still around.
Oh, yeah,
I'm still around.
Okay.
Enjoying the discussion. Now, if I just make one reflection on this interesting question, I think traditionally, if I would look at it historically, I would say that yes, the European Union has often been more of a slow-moving engine that has had long-term projects working on, let's say, for instance, the creation of internal market. So, not being as sensitive to any, conjunctures in short term, but sort of, and that's the traditional way when it was more of a remote technocracy that was left to deal with things in a longer term. I think what we've witnessed over the last, let's say, 10 or 15 years, it's much more of an events-based politics in the European Union. That expectations are raised that the EU should also be able to respond rapidly to nearly all kinds of crises. And you see that institutionally in the EU with the rise, for instance, of European Council, where the heads of state and government, they tend to meet much, much more often to deal with issues that are risen on the agenda rapidly, and then there is a sort of there is a sort of demand for a European response or some sort of reaction. So I think the European Union has, in a sense, become more responsive to what actually goes on in the world, but that also begs a question. And I think that is something for the future in the EU, when we talk about it, is how to manage expectations. Because at times then that creates a sort of expectations capabilities gap, because the European Union is, after all, not yet a state. We cannot expect the European Union to act as if it was a state. And I think that happens, and I think it will happen even more so, precisely because of the geopolitics surrounding us. I think this will be very important for the European Union over the next years to come. How do we together form structures, but also policies and institutions that are able to cope with these challenges? Because when you see it around us, or just look at Belarus or the neighborhood right now, there are strong expectations for the EU to be this actor, but are we really there? Do we have the right structures, or are the member states willing to let the European Union become this actor that some would wish? And I think that's the question for the future, and that will shape a lot. How do we manage this capabilities expectations gap in EU affairs?
Thank you very much, Göran. And now I think it was Susanna Turunen, the YLE EU correspondent from Brussels, who had a question or comment, please.
Well, I have questions for our foreign debaters. I work for the Finnish broadcasting company, but here I'm just a citizen and listener. But I'm interested in foreign, security and defense policy. Finland, 25 years ago, 3 neutral countries joined EU, and as Heinikoski said, one of the reasons we joined was sort of like to secure our position in changing world, but not be allied. What is the discussion in Sweden and Austria? Who do you trust for security? Austria is still neutral. I believe that you underline the neutrality, not just non-allied. And who does Sweden trust? I mean, we are still all non-allied. I think it's very interesting because we, in this geopolitical situation where the superpowers are muscling up again, we are in between squeezed as one EU, but also because of different interests, different member states have different issues and interests. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And given the time, I think this is maybe the last question. I would maybe add in this question a similar element to it, because there's been quite a bit of discussion already, and the ambassador mentioned the geopolitical, geoeconomic realities, and the current Commissioner President Ursula von der Leyen and also the High Representative for Foreign and Security Policy have suggested that the EU must learn to speak the language of power. And then, of course, it's a big question, and what kind of power the EU want to speak about and how to do it, but how you also what is your approach on that very question, learning to speak the language of power? What kind of power, and whether the EU can really do it in the foreseeable future? Please, Maximilian.
I'll kick off with your question. Maybe just to illustrate, to come back to the whole issue of geography, to illustrate that in 1995, or maybe in the early 90s, we were on the edge of the Iron Curtain. Today, Austria is surrounded by EU members and NATO members, with the strong exception of Liechtenstein and Switzerland. You, coming from Finland, will understand that your threat assessment of the situation is quite different for Finland than for Austria, which is surrounded by NATO and EU countries. Nevertheless, Austria has retained its decades-old policy of neutrality. It is part of our constitution. For many, it has become part of our identity. But in our own definition of Austria's neutrality, this does not mean that we exclude ourselves from showing solidarity in the work on the European Common Defence and Security projects. So yes, we are trying to be an active participant as much as we can in this European project, but we are not part of any military alliance. For us, throughout even the period of the Cold War, we have tried to use neutrality to also play along on the international scene. Finland did very much the same in the Cold War years, I think quite successfully. I think our role now is quite different. We will try to continue to shape international policy within the structures of the European Union. We are not trying to build bridges from sort of outside the EU, but very much from within. So we do see our role in the global policy as part of the European Union. Wherever this union may go, that will depend a little bit on where the world is turning. I don't want to give a big prediction on that, but certainly we see our role in European solidarity, but for now, neutrality will definitely stay in our constitution.
Thank you. Göran.
Well, thank you. This is a very complex and big questions, and I'm not sure if I can provide any insightful answers to them. But if you look at the first one, it's a bit similar, and I think Juha, as you are the expert on Finnish security policy, you would probably be able to fill in. So it's not leaving neutrality, similar to Austria. Sweden is trying, of course, to compensate for this by using various sorts of collaborations. Obviously, first and foremost is with Finland, that it's understood that this has to be done in tandem. And then Sweden is building a number of other, the current at least government is building several bilateral relations also outside the European Union. But in present time, there is a changing nature of our defense debates in Sweden, as we had during the first decades that we've just passed, very much downsizing our defense, not looking at territorial issues, but rather, international commitments in various expeditions. This is now changing quite a lot, and there is a different threat perception that will guide probably all of these discussions. However, it is not European Union is the most important foreign policy tool in Sweden, but it's not the only tool. So proposals for increasing, and that links to your question, Juha, what kind of power should the EU be? I think in a Swedish context, more realpolitik or more geopolitical strength, capability, capacity at the European level should not mean a militarized European Union, but a sort of more of the soft powers that the EU can have. And also linking that to sort of this geopolitical commission issue, I think more in terms of geoeconomics, where the EU is really strong in terms of trade policy, environment, etc. There's strong support from a Swedish perspective, but not on the more hard security and military issues. So that's sort of my answer to this complex question.
It's very complex questions, yes. And then Saila, please, if you have any views on these questions.
It was really interesting to hear the Swedish. I've looked a bit at the Finnish and Swedish debates on the establishment of the permanent structured cooperation and how the politicians discussed it, and I think it was really interesting how in Sweden it seems that this military non-alignment is really like more rooted in the country's identity, and it's important to maintain that. In Finland there was practically no debate when PESCO was established about this military non-alignment, and I think Finland also presents the EU as the main kind of security frame, whereas in Finland it's this Finnish-Swedish defense cooperation, which is of course also important for Finland, is the main issue. So this is interesting to look at also in the future how these three post-neutral or at some point neutral countries will evolve in the European defense cooperation.
Thank you very much, Saila, as well. And now our time is up for this panel, and I'm very pleased to thank all our panelists, Ambassador Saila and Göran from Sweden. I will leave it with a thought, one thought when Göran mentioned my field of expertise as well, that of course in the past it's been possible to isolate military power and military alignment to some extent within the EU context and also in global affairs. But if we look at how the world is changing, I think the talk about geopolitics, geoeconomics, it all leads to the question that whether the military and defense dimension can be, in the future, isolated in the European context from those policy fields. And I think this is where some of the analysis also suggests that the learning to speak the language of power implies a defense capability development. But I agree, this is a very long and thorny debate for the Europeans to engage with. But let's see what the next 25 years will hold in that respect as well. Thank you very much for your excellent analysis and answers to my questions, and also thank you for the audience for this active participation and that you are here in numerous heads. I can see this is really a pleasure to have a kind of a live event as well. As Saila mentioned this morning in Twitter, it's been since March when we have had anything like this, and we've been just participating in webinars, which is quite different in context. So it's been a wonderful 45 minutes. Thank you very much. This event is closed.